You can grab your translation radios outside in the foyer. Also, we remind you that all sessions are being live streamed and translated, and we invite you to go to the IGF website and the IGF YouTube channel to watch and share.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Juan Carlos Hernandez Walker. I am an International Affairs Coordinator at the Mexican Telecommunications and Broadcasting Regulator, the Federal Telecommunications Institute. It is my pleasure to be here with you. This session will present the outputs of the 2016 IGF stakeholder-driven best practice forums on IXPs, IPv6, gender and access, and cybersecurity, as well as showcase the outcomes of the Phase 2 of the IGF policy options for connecting the next billion. The session will highlight that these community activities have resulted in tangible resources from which policymakers can draw when addressing Internet policy issues. The session will also seek community suggestions and input as to how these outputs could be taken forward into other relevant Internet governance fora, and how IGF community intersessional work could be enhanced looking ahead to 2017 and beyond. The discussion will also address how to improve IGF outputs in light of the recommendation of the CSTD Working Group on IGF improvements. It is my pleasure to give the floor now to the chair of this session, Constance Bohmeler from ISOC.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'm Constance Bohmeler from the Internet Society, and I had the pleasure as a previous MAG member and an IGF community member to participate to developing what we call IGF intersessional activities with many others. So a few words about IGF intersessional activities and basically why we are holding this session today. The goal here is really to present the outputs of a year-long process of IGF activities. We've heard the call from the Internet community. We've heard the call from the UN CSTD Working Group on IGF improvements, the call to have more outputs, that the IGF evolve a little bit, remains a platform for discussions, but also be able to synthesize and deliver some best practices that then stakeholders, policymakers, leaders of the Internet community can then take home and implement in their various countries and communities. This said, of course, the purpose is not to change the mandate of the IGF. The mandate of the IGF is detailed in the Tunis agenda, and it is clear that it is not to become a negotiating body developing binding outputs. So there really is a fine balance here to observe and find. A few words about the methodology, whether for the best practices or what we call the policy options that were developed. In the spirit of the IGF and the IGF's tradition, it has been multi-stakeholder and bottom-up from the beginning to the end, both in terms of selecting the topics, gathering inputs, and also editing the draft outputs that will be discussed today. For 2016, it was mentioned we had 4 best practice forums, one on IPv6 adoption, another one on IXPs, another one on gender and access, and finally a best practice forum on cybersecurity, and then a horizontal track on developing policy options for connecting and enabling the next billion. When we say enabling, it really is to indirectly support reaching the sustainable development goals through the use and development of Internet access. I will conclude with a reminder. The draft outputs of all of these tracks of work are available on the IGF website. They're open for comments. We have a system of web platform where anybody can add some comments. These comments will then be taken into account by the Secretariat towards final conclusion of the document and the publication of these various documents shortly after the IGF. And with this, I will hand it to our moderator, who will facilitate the discussion, presentation of the best practices, but also the policy options for connecting the next billion. Eleni, please.
Thank you, Constance, and thank you for everybody for being here. And my co-moderator and I will take over, different parts of this. And in this, I hope we bring about not only the substance of the discussions, especially in the best practice forums, but also commentary about the process, about the multi-stakeholder nature and the value of that, and what the participants gained, and why that is important in connecting and enhancing the next billion. And we will start off with the Best Practices Forum, addressing really the three key enablers in cybersecurity, IPv, and the numbering, and IXPs. And then we will also have the Best Practice Forum on gender, which is a very key constituency, and there's a recognition that the issues there need to be addressed in a particular focused manner. So without further ado, let's actually start off, because we would like audience participation. I would like to give the floor to Marcus Kummer and Martin van Horenbeek, who will talk about the Best Practice Forum on cybersecurity. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I will be very brief. This Best Practice Forum is a follow-up to two previous practice forums, one on unsolicited communication, that is spam, and the other one on CSIRTs, incident response teams. The experts involved said early on this should be conceived as a multi-year project. We had excellent discussions, and we also looked forward on where to move from here to find the soft spot for the IGF, so to speak. We did not directly address connecting the next billion, but it's clear that cybersecurity is a key component for the next billion coming online. And one way also of looking forward would be to link cybersecurity to the Sustainable Development Goals. We also recognize that the soft spot of the IGF is precisely the very multi-stakeholder nature, and some of the discussions on cybersecurity take place in government-only places, such as the Global Group of Experts, which is linked to the first committee of the United Nations dealing with security and disarmament. So there, breaking down the silos and building bridges could be a role for the IGF going forward, but we also recognize that much work is done elsewhere, and we don't want to duplicate work that is done elsewhere. With that, I hand over to Martin, who will talk more about the substance.
Thank you very much, Marcus. When we started this new Best Practices Forum, as a group, we came together and we really thought about topics that would actually make sense for us to tackle. And what we discovered was that cybersecurity as a term itself is actually very controversial. And it's one of those terms where quite often one particular stakeholder community steps forward and other stakeholder community steps back because they don't feel like they have the ability to contribute in a multi-stakeholder way to decisions that are made that are somewhat related to them, but they don't have direct input. So what we wanted to do within the Best Practices Forum was to find a way to address that problem. And we very early on decided in the first two calls on the topic that we were going to focus on finding and identifying best practices in cooperation across stakeholder groups, which was interesting for us because it was different than the two last BPFs on unsolicited communications and CSIRT, which were very much focused on communication within a particular stakeholder group and how that interaction with the other stakeholder groups would happen. So we got started by asking each of the stakeholder communities to provide input on the topic, focused on a number of different questions. And we really asked them to bring forward examples of best practices and examples of cooperation that had succeeded. We received a total of 17 responses, which was actually very good compared to the previous years. 17 formal responses that were actual write-ups in terms of a document, which were provided to the group. And then we had several calls which were brokered by the IGF Secretariat, where discussion along those topic lines took place, and we identified outcomes and areas of consensus. In addition to the areas of consensus, we also focused on identifying areas of difference where stakeholder groups didn't agree on particular things and approaches to cooperate. And we came out with a draft document for public review, which contained both the consensus statements that most groups agreed on and those areas where further discussion was actually valuable. And then here at the IGF, at the meeting, we had a feeder session organized by an affiliated participating group, which really focused on those areas where communication wasn't easy, where cooperation was difficult, and how those policy spaces could actually be opened to other stakeholder communities. And that was provided as input to the main session, which took place yesterday morning. During the main session, we asked both participants and non-participants to the group to come and actually provide input on the document and discuss some of those topics that were more controversial. We have a long list of outcomes, and I by no means intend to go through all of them right here, but some key ones that I think are important to mention was that multi-stakeholder involvement is essential, and it's essential for stakeholder communities to trust, respect and understand the expertise that was offered by the other communities. Also, cybersecurity as a term is loaded with context, and the IGF has an opportunity to redefine it as a common goal and work towards a common understanding of what cooperation really means. Roles and responsibilities are also not fixed, and neither should they be, because technology and security is a very evolving topic, and the input of particular stakeholder communities may change over time. Some cybersecurity issues become more or less important over time. And then finally, there's a significant opportunity for more civil society input. Compared to the last 2 years of best practices forums, we saw a real increase in the amount of civil society participation, and that input was actually very, very valuable. Towards the future, we talked about a number of topics where we feel the BPF can contribute. And one very big one, as Marcus also mentioned, is finding alignment between cybersecurity goals and the sustainable development goals. And how do we identify ways where cybersecurity can really support bringing the internet to that next billion of users? And also, growth of access also should go hand in hand with quality of access. And quality is definitely a cybersecurity issue. Finally, differences with other forums. There was actually a very big difference between the Best Practices Forum and other forums where this type of discussion takes place. The most important one is that cybersecurity expertise is not evenly spread. And that's something that came up in every single discussion we had as part of the BPF. And the IGF and the Best Practices Forum offer a great opportunity for different organizations, different stakeholders with differing levels of expertise to come together and share problems that they don't have the opportunity to share in another context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. It is meant to be 5 minutes for each best practice forum, not for each speaker. So we've already run over and we've got a very tight schedule. So I'm going to ask everybody please to try and stick to those 5 minutes. Our next best practice forum is Renata Aquino Ribeiro, who will speak on gender and access.
Hello, I am Renata Aquino Ribeiro, and the Best Practice Forum Gender is in its second year of running. In 2015, it produced a comprehensive and extensive output document on the theme of online abuse and gender-based violence. This year, the policy recommendations from 2015 have been summarized in a user-based infographic to be widely disseminated. In 2016, the BPF Gender focused on studying challenges pertaining to women's ability to access and benefit from meaningful internet access. The BPF community specifically decided to focus on the barriers preventing women from gaining and benefiting from meaningful internet access. And also it investigated and mapped over 60 initiatives around the world that are aimed at overcoming these barriers. In undertaking this work, the BPF went to great lengths to engage stakeholders at different phases of the BPF's work, including the use of frequent and regular online meetings, a survey, the gathering of case studies, regional strategies for communication, and importantly, its participation at various national and regional IGF meetings with the aim of gathering more local case studies and experiences related to contextual challenges faced by women in accessing the internet. The BPF is also in discussions with various stakeholders to promote better and wider use and awareness of its existing outcomes and ongoing work. It has, for instance, partnered with the ITU and UN Women in their Equals initiative to help map initiatives that are addressing the gender digital divide and continue to engage with various stakeholders to promote its work. The BPF will, following its successful session on Wednesday, work towards finalizing conclusions and recommendations in its outcome report, and will also continue to engage its vibrant and dedicated community on how its work can continue in 2017. It welcomes stakeholder input on how this can be done, both at this session and on its dedicated mailing list. For the national and regional IGFs, we have already gathered input from Brazil IGF via its new unconferences session, and LAC IGF, which had itself a session on connecting and enabling the next billion, covering the BPF's work. For Asia Pacific IGF, our input was gathered at the same time as LAC IGF, the same day. So we had both national and regional IGF discussing the BPF's theme, and that fed back into our document. We also have regional strategies for communication, which involve the use of mobile messaging, collective documents, and authorship given to our vibrant community, which also resulted in documents created by participants of the BPF, such as the Declaration for Young Women in Latin America. This declaration became also a statement adopted by civil society in its joint civil society meeting, and is currently available in the Best Bits platform. There are many paths of engagement in the BPF, but this regional work, coupled with the theme of gender and access, is something that has brought the BPF to a whole new level. We have now a very multicultural community of participants, and their assessment of initiatives which help bridge the gender and access barrier is increasingly important for us to understand the future of internet governance and the important issues that surround this theme. Thanks.
Thank you, Renata, for taking less time than allocated, but also thank you for walking us through a really systematic description of the multi-stakeholder process at every level in every region. I really appreciate that. And now we move over to Izumi Okutani and Sumon Sabir, who will speak on behalf of the Best Practice Forum on IPv6.
Good morning, everyone. So before I share about our work, I'd like to do a quick recap on what IP address is. So this is a technical identifier that you need to connect devices on the internet, just like phone numbers that you need to communicate on telephone. And the current version that most of us use is version called IP version 4, IPv4. And this has run out of new available stock of address space to distribute to the coming new users. So this new version called IP version 6, which is available in such a large volume that you don't have to worry about running out and be able to accommodate connecting to the next billion users. So that's what IPv6 is. And I'd like to share some of the key points that we've summarized in our document. So the general status of IPv6 is that it's happening in certain areas, such as major global contents that most of you are familiar, such as Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. In the area of mobile, certain mobile operators observe over 70% of its traffic available in IPv6. On the other hand, if you look at the global deployment of IPv6, it's a little less than 8%. And there's disparity between different countries where Belgium is observing over 50% of deployment, and there are other countries where the deployment rate is almost zero. And there's still a lot of room for improvements in V6 support and local contents. So I'd like to share what each of us can do to promote IPv6 deployment for policymakers, industry decision makers, and consumers. So for policymakers, you can require vendors to support IPv6 in their equipment, in the features which is not available in the same manner as IPv4, and providing technical challenge to deploy IPv6 network. There are also things that they can do to raise awareness of business decision makers in industry to deploy V6, or raise awareness for consumers to choose V6 supported equipment. They can also help in the area of capacity building to provide trainings, perhaps with help of private sector, so that engineers are able to deploy IPv6 technically. For business decision makers, when you purchase new equipment to deploy new network, make sure you choose V6 supported ones. And also turn on IPv6 commercial service by default without requiring users to apply for V6 service explicitly. And there are also things that you can do as consumers. So look around in your environment at home, whether it's V6 supported, your devices, your home router, your mobile. And if your upstream ISP is not connected to IPv6, or if the content that you see regularly is not available in V6, ask for it. And this will make them realize that their commercial needs for V6 deployment and lead for them to deploy V6. So these are the things that each of us can do to encourage V6 deployment and accommodate environment for connecting the next billion. And I pass it on to Sumon for the summary.
Yeah, thanks, Izumi. The message is that the V4 is over, that there is no more V6, we cannot grow with that. So we all have to use IPv6 from now on. So key message is that if you want to connect the next billion and enable the next billion with internet, we have to go to V6. If as an individual, as a government, as an industry, as an individual, we must check whether we're getting V6, all our devices enabled, what you mentioned. As a government, if we have an enabling environment to go V6 and to promote that so the industry feel that we need to do it immediately. As an industry, we must take care that we are offering IPv6 connectivity to our end users. Then we can really achieve the goal of connecting and enabling this billion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Izumi and Sumon, and for sharing your efforts to try and smooth out the unevenness of IPv6 deployment. We now have the next best practice forum is on IXPs. It's Wim de Gazelle and Jane Coffin. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you and good morning. We're going to report to you very simply on best practices, or from our experience, real practices from Internet exchange points. IXPs are a critical factor for us to consider with respect to connecting the next billion and the unconnected, is to recognize that unconnected communities are enabling connectivity through IXPs and community networks, and our role is to enable them. Internet exchange points, quite simply, are a meeting point for networks to exchange traffic over the same technical platform. They do help with cheaper, better, faster traffic, better quality of service, and they help improve the internet ecosystem, not only from a technical perspective, but a human technical perspective, training people. Great deal about internet exchange points is building trust among the community and the people putting them together. IXPs grow and develop with the support of the local community. The importance of trust, as I mentioned before, and cooperation between local stakeholders is paramount. It's the human trust network that is developed among the participants at the IXP in developing it, growing it, and sustaining it. Last year's BPF focused on forming this community and the necessary trust and cooperation to establish IXPs, which create the very core enabling environment.
And well, last year's BPF really focused on how to build, how to establish IXPs. This year, we wanted to take it one step further and look on how to make those IXPs successful. The BPF looked into the management, how to run an IXP, how to overcome challenges, and how to make them play the role that they should play and should play to help their communities evolve and develop an inclusive and sustainable internet in their societies. It's important to understand a very simple principle the BPF took. It is looking at knowledge that is existent in the community, in different parts of the community, different organizations, work done by IXP federations, but also experiences by individual IXPs. The idea is the knowledge is there, but it's not spread everywhere. One of the main purposes of the IXP of the BPF, is to bring that knowledge together. And that's not in one document. That happened throughout the process, a process with a mailing list, people discussing on the list, sharing their best practices. Yesterday we had a workshop where we heard different case studies from IXPs, also to share their best practices, their success stories. And the next step is the output document, is only capturing all this knowledge that we, with the BPF, want to make available to the whole community. So knowledge picked here and there, real examples, real experiences, are now put together and given back in an open resource to the community. Therefore, I think the output document of the output of the BPF is very important, or it's very important that it doesn't stop here. Now the output has to be taken up and has to go back to the communities. I think the document itself will be very interesting for developing IXPs that want to see what happened elsewhere in the world, how people or how other organizations solved their challenges or similar challenges. It's also very important for decision makers and stakeholder organizations in communities that don't have an IXP, or that are still looking in how they can develop their local internet. Because for them, there is a lot of information that came out of this process that clearly explains what the benefits can be of an IXP for their communities. And they can take it up, they can start a discussion in their communities, start to talk, maybe look for expertise outside of their local region, but have the clear message and take the decision, bring people together, and start working on an IXP. So I think this is, in a short overview, I think the main process, the main thing we did last year, and the message should be clear. IXPs are very valuable to help and build up the local internet community, and the BPF can help by giving the information that is available in the world back to the people that are interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wim and Jane. I think just getting a sense of the kind of human and community sides of it and not just the technical side is very, very insightful. We're going to move straight on to the next session, and we'll take some questions from the report backs from the best practice forums at the end of this. The next panelists will speak to the connecting and enhancing the next billion. We've got a set of 4 speakers. I'm going to just ask you, while you make your inputs, to also address some of the difficulties or challenges in the practice of multi-stakeholderism when one's involved in these initiatives, and respond to some of the sense or concerns that these initiatives are kind of acted upon some stakeholders and executed by others, so that there is that multi-stakeholderism actually in practice here, and within different multi-stakeholder groups, who is participating? Are you actually getting participation from different regions, different parts of those different multi-stakeholder sectors? Thanks very much. We're going to start with Henri van der Spey from the IGF Secretariat, please.
Thanks, Alison. I'd just like to provide a quick overview of how we got to the point where we now have a draft 2 on the IGF's review platform, and also perhaps to answer some of your questions around to what extent we managed to engaged a variety of stakeholders. Like other intersessional activities, this one also adopted this similar approach of being open and inclusive and bottom-up. We worked with the community to develop a framework document in which we highlighted the key things that we wanted to look into this year. As we all know, connecting and enabling the next billion is quite a broad topic. So the community decided that they wanted to focus specifically on the Sustainable Development Goals, and then also how we can take policy options to not only global levels, and keep it at this level, but how it differs at various other levels nationally and regionally. So just in terms of the methodology approach, it was similar to last year in the sense that we issued a call for input. That call for input contained a list of questions that we asked people to respond to. If people didn't want to respond to those questions, we also welcomed background contributions. And as you all know, there's a lot of great work in this field that's been published recently. So we also considered that. We reached out to people directly to have that reflected in our report. Examples are, for instance, the World Bank's digital dividends report. We reached out to, GSMA has done recent work on how specifically mobiles can support each of the SDGs. The APC, the WEF, and also the various IGF intersessional activities from which we welcomed a lot of substantive input. I'd like to mention specifically the DC on community connectivity and the one on public access and libraries, which really provided us with very substantive and useful input this year, as well as on the best practice forums. So we did manage to get quite a lot of stakeholder input, although that can always be improved. I think this is a good way forward, at least it provides a good platform to start with. We still continue welcoming input. So far we've received around 60 contributions from 45 unique contributors. As mentioned by Constance earlier, our second draft is now on the IGF's review platform, and we will welcome input until more or less the middle of this month, I think the 20th of December, after which we will try to conclude the document and publish our final output document. To add to that, we might be building on that depending on what the MAG says to produce a draft 3. So this doesn't necessarily mean it's the end of connecting and enabling the next billion. In terms of content, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because it's quite a substantive report, but just to highlight the 3 key themes this year. The first one, as you can notice from the way in which the title of this initiative has changed, there's a clear move from just looking at access to looking at meaningful access. So that's why the words "and enabling the next billion" was added. And we see that in a lot of our contributions that we need to be looking at not only the demand side, but also the supply side. We need to look at, to borrow from the World Bank, analog complements to this issue. And I hope Frank will add to why we need to look at things like human rights and ensuring that we have an internet that's universal in line with what UNESCO calls the Internet Universality Framework. Other key themes in that regard is that we need to look at different levels of access and the way in which we're looking at access. Are we looking only at community access, or are we looking at private access? And in that sense, what's been quite clear this week is the movement to looking at community networks. And that's also, we got significant input from the Dynamic Coalition on community connectivity, and we welcome that as a useful new addition to this work. The one main part of the document was also around the SDGs. As I mentioned, we looked at how internet access should be able to help as a whole in enabling development, sustainable development. And then we also try to look at the 17 specific SDGs and try to highlight case studies and narratives that we received from contributors on how specifically internet access can contribute to different SDGs. This part, I think, is a starting point. I think we can still add to a lot of this, and we will continue to look at the contributions that we've received this week to add to that. Lastly, the document also looks at national and regional specificities around access. And this part, we welcomed a lot of input from our national and regional IGF initiatives, and also the DC on community connectivity, as I mentioned, and then some people, Christopher Yu, will be speaking to their great initiatives around this and case studies. And And just to conclude, I think, as I mentioned before, this is hopefully a useful starting point for the community, and we look forward to hearing from Alex, Frank, and Christopher around how we can continue to build on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Henri. This is a very good description of, a year-long, possibly very painful process, not just the process of collecting the input, but then coming up with the summary document, which is more than just narrative and actually has synthesis. So, I would like to thank Constance and everybody else who worked on this. We now move on to a speaker who needs no introduction, Frank Veroux from UNESCO.
Well, thank you very much. I will also try to be very brief because our positions have been made very clear. But we strongly believe in the Best Practices Forum and in general in the whole exercise of the IGF because we strongly believe in the multi-stakeholder approach to everything we do. Let me begin by saying that within our mandate, the most important mandate of UNESCO is to build peace by facilitating the free flow of ideas and knowledge between peoples of the world. This facilitates understanding and peace building. I think this is valid for all ICTs. Internet is a mechanism for this free flow of ideas and knowledge. So we give, as UNESCO, and we have brought this message here, equal importance to connectivity to the next billion people connected. It's very important for us that that connectivity reaches especially those that have been historically marginalized for ethnic or for economic reasons. But at the same time, we give equal weight to the content. Connectivity without content would not suffice. We need relevant content. And this falls into the SDGs agenda, the 2030 agenda we're looking at, which gives us exactly the framework. So today, we're talking of internet from a demand side, a supply side, but also, very importantly, the policies that accompany that. For us, the first element of those policies should be a human rights focus, should be universal access and neutrality of the internet, and many of the elements that will facilitate to reach the legitimate and necessary content. Some of that has been mentioned, and more as we have had the different IGFs and debates around the world, the idea that to have a gender focus is not only to make ICTs and connectivity accessible for women, but it's also to have a gender approach in the connectivity and in the content that is transmitted, which will facilitate the SDGs, not only Goal 5, but also the possibility of all goals. Equally, we believe that communication and information to build knowledge societies is relevant for all 17 goals. Now, obviously, we have been working in several of them. We worked on 4 on education. We have worked on 5 on gender. We work on infrastructure. We work on documentary heritage and preservation of documents in libraries and archives. But specifically on 16, on facilitating the public access to information, which we believe is fundamental to exercise human rights, to democracy, and now to development. Let me finish by saying with this, in the best practices, we strongly feel that the IGF has demonstrated time and time again that internet can only be understood and can only be planned for the future with a strong multi-stakeholder dialogue, not only worldwide, organized by the UN in this case, but it should also be an example for every single state and policymakers in every state. It is absolutely essential that every state build its own multi-stakeholder dialogue internally to guarantee these policies. So then we can see that information and knowledge can become part of the development, but also can become part of the gender equity policies, can integrate all groups, all minorities, all sectors of society, but also can allow the reaching of the further development policies. So we would, in this IGF, more than any other, emphasize the need to restructuring. We're doing a study now that we will share, hopefully by the next IGF, on the best practices of internet in the debate of multi-stakeholder dialogues and policy presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank, and for your reminding us that people can't exercise their rights unless they're connected, but also importantly that unless there's content that is relevant to them, that they will not be able to either. And we look forward to the best practice report because I think people are really trying to bring these connectivity and sort of post-connectivity rights issues together. We now have Alex Wong from the World Economic Forum, please. 5 minutes.
Thank you. Let me first commend the Secretariat for the excellent paper that was used as an input. I thought it was actually an excellent reference and served as a foundation for some of the discussions that we had in my own personal learnings from this. I think the major themes that the group that I was involved with, and we held a few sessions related to this theme of connecting the next million, that I'll highlight is, first of all, the message that I took away from the power of local empowerment, and particularly the community networking working groups that have done great work, and I thought the session that they held here was fantastic, and I think it really opened a lot of eyes on how this is a real phenomena that we have to start adapting and realizing how to take advantage of. I think the DC on libraries with the public high-speed access angle as a key strategy that we need to look more closely at to connecting the next billion or the next 4 billion was a major message as well. And of course, these elements both then enable the local content that is such critical, that's going to be such a critical enabler. The second point I'll make that I think was a real good progress, and IGF served as a great platform, was this issue of data. And Christopher, of course, will talk more about that, but this whole theme of how can we make sure we're collecting the data to measure what we're doing, how can we work together to contribute data, because a lot of data is out there, but it's not being made available for appropriate reasons. But how can we create places where we can test that out? And there was a lot of good side discussions actually on how we can do that, and I'm looking forward to seeing how those progress. And finally, I think there was a major theme about how can we coordinate better. With the World Economic Forum, together with Global Connect, Alliance for Affordable Internet, ICANN, IEEE, ISOC, ITU, People-Centered Internet, UNESCO, World Bank. It's a long list on purpose because we felt that as global organizations, we need to come here also with a message that we're trying to work together as best as we can, a coalition of the willing. And to the comment of our moderator about the challenges of a multi-stakeholder process, so far the egos haven't come into play. Maybe at some point egos will, and we'll have to work that out as we get there, but I think it's a great starting point, and I think that's a message that is an important message for IGF as we go forward and try to move to action. So in terms of process, because that was one of the questions the moderator asked us to look at, I think on the next billion opportunity, it's time to move to action. We've all been talking so much, and one proposal could be that we make next year's forum a presentation of some of the projects that are going based on commitments that are being made now. And I can already say on behalf of the forum, and together with many partners that are part of this in our activities and country programs, such as the one in Northern Corridor in Africa and Argentina, I'm happy to present together with the partners that are driving this initiative what we're doing, invite others to get involved, and report back in a year's time on progress. And maybe those are thematic workshops or country workshops that can be held more comprehensively and get more ministers here as well from those countries to be involved in the dialogue. I think also the final comment I'll make, or two more comments, on forward-looking, there was a session that we held with the ITU UNESCO Open Forum session that took place yesterday that really digressed into some of the future issues that we need to also use this forum to discuss. Future issues such as the shared economy, such as issues that are going to really resulting in conflict with societies for those that are being left behind. Can this be a place where we really take a few steps forward on where internet is going to be transforming people's lives and societies and making sure that we're addressing some of those issues that are going to be upcoming, the sensitive issues. And then I'll just end with a comment that one of our participants made in the session related to the multi-stakeholder process. At the risk of it being a bit provocative, the comment was made that multi-stakeholder is great, but let's not make that the be-all, end-all, because we also have to move to action. And it reminded me of a quote that I shared in the session yesterday that Margaret Mead said, which is that never doubt a group of committed individuals can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So we absolutely need to be multi-stakeholder. Everyone in this room is multi-stakeholder, but we also got to move forward and move to action, and we should count on you as individuals to take action and let others follow you while we sort of maintain that balance. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Alex. We move to Christopher Yu. There's a lot of discussion about, collecting the data and really understanding impacts and how do we measure all these activity. Christopher.
Well, thank you very much. And may I have my slides, please? So we are delighted to be here. We are One World Connected. You may recognize us by the orange shoes and the shirts we're wearing. That's the orange shoes are in part to support the UN Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women, the 16-day area. You also may recognize us more prominently from the coffee in the village, which is not there today, and we've received some comments regretting that. So we're happy to be here. We are really committed to doing some of the empirical work that is going on. Henri mentioned that talking about the work on policy options for connecting and enabling the next billion, was it helpful? I would say it was essential. It was the starting point for our analysis, and we really salute and thank the great work that Constance, Henri, Brian, and others have done to make that possible. That was the starting point for our work, to try to understand what is going on, and looking at ISAID phase 1, and as the inputs came in phase 2, and from the NRIs and the IGF, we also build on a lot of partners. Listing partners is always risky because you risk leaving them out. I noticed, for example, here on the panel, Helani in Learnasia and Allison in Research ICT Africa have been instrumental, as have ICANN and a bunch of other organizations. The community networking community has been, as Alex noted, a tremendous, has really changed the way our thinking, and the engagement with them has been very helpful in the conversations we've had here at the IGF. And in fact, we're actually reaching out actively to governments. You know, Allison, you asked, what are we doing? We actually are looking and have working on a plan to reach out to every stakeholder group in every region of the world. We're open to anyone, and many have approached us, but we're taking it upon ourselves to really make the effort to try to get the broad-based engagement that we can. What is the scope of the project? We are attempting to identify every effort to connect additional people to the internet, every discrete effort, supply side, demand side, in any region of the world, government-led, civil society-led, business-led, every single one we can find, and to gather data that assesses the impact of these analyses. There's a lot of great work going on, and the catalog itself we believe is useful to share that information with other people. But in addition, empirical validation, any metrics is largely missing, and when it does exist, it's piecemeal and doesn't collected in a way that does not permit comparisons across projects. And our goal is to try to develop that data and develop the metrics. It's very labor intensive, but a university-based program is actually very well suited, because for students, this is a wonderful opportunity for them to develop their skills. We're now developing the metrics that go along with it, and then we're going to we're going to disseminate this information to the entire community. We've identified 200 plus case studies. We've done 20 of the narrative portions as an introduction. We also have a web page. We have a crowdsource alternative for people simply to feed in stories that we would like to develop. We will blog about everything we do, and we will push this information out to the community. I'll just tell you two quick stories. There's more information on the slides than I will tell you. Econet Wireless is in Zimbabwe. They're providing cell towers off the electrical grid, powered by diesel generators. In addition to providing internet access, they're providing the first electric power to homes. They actually have surplus power at a very affordable rate. But interestingly, they're actually providing vaccines. The challenge of vaccines is they have to be kept cold without electric power. You can't do that. They've vaccinated 250,000 children in Zimbabwe. They're currently expanding the program into Ghana, India, and other countries in the future. The Mwingo project in Kenya uses unlicensed spectrum and TV white spaces. The reason I point this out, they're also connecting individuals, 10,000 individuals. They're connecting schools, and in terms of impact, we actually have talked to the principal of the school, one of the schools in this area, and she reports that the test scores have gone up on every single subject on the Kenyan national exam. And so we are able to get some of these metrics. We're hoping to turn them into more consistent evaluative tools that we can use across the board. So this is the basic scope of the project. This is really open to everyone. We are determined to not only to make it open, but actually act upon that, and we're trying to reach out to everyone we can find. There is a dynamic community coalition associated with it, with a mailing list. We invite you to join it. We invite you to link to us on social media to find out what we're doing, but also to provide information into what we're doing. We need help identifying case studies, new ones. We need help improving the ones we have, and we are actively working with Helani, Allison, and others to try to develop the metrics. We would really appreciate the engagement of the entire community to make this possible, and every conversation we've had has really enriched our thinking. We've had some fantastic discussions with governments, which in many ways have been the most difficult part of this, but we are very encouraged by the progress, and our contact information is here. Please get in touch with us whenever you can, and we really welcome your participation.
Thank you, Christopher. Everyone in the audience either knew about all of this because you had participated last year, throughout this year in the intersessional activities, or you had no clue, and in which case you probably have a broad sense of what the connecting and enhancing the next billion sort of platform, let's call it, was about, and that report. We would like to take your questions, particularly if you were involved in it, about what it meant for those who participated and about that process, either in the BPFs or any of the other initiatives like the WEF and the other stuff that was going on. You can raise your hand and we will send a mic to you over there. And I would kindly ask you to keep it to a very short intervention, 1 minute, and we will try and collect, if there's more than one, a few questions and get the panel to respond. Thank you.
Sorry, and of course, just your name first and your organization.
Okay. My name is Raul Plummer. I'm here representing Electronic Frontier Finland, as well as the Dynamic Coalition on Community Connectivity. And I'd like to ask Christopher, is it true that you get most of your funding from massive internet operators?
So we are getting support. I'm sorry.
Take a round of responses, please. Questions, please. Any other questions?
My name is Juan Ortiz. I recently finished a Google Policy Fellowship here in Mexico. And I would like to know, I mean, when we try to create targets about connectivity, we often generate two incentives. One is to connect more people, and the other one is for governments to show that they're connecting more people. And these do not necessarily go in the same direction. So are there any ways in which you're working to, for example, make more transparent the methodologies governments are using to measure the increase in internet connectivity? I think if we create standards for governments to show how they're doing this, how they're creating the samples, how big the samples are, etc., it would be of great help.
Thank you. And behind the, yeah.
Hi, I'm Nico Chanis from Altermundi, also from the DC3, the Dynamic Coalition on Community Connectivity. I was very glad to listen so many panelists mention the work of the coalition and the presence of the community connectivities movement in this IGF. I think has been awesome. I would very much like to have the community connectivity movements represented there in the panel next time. I think it's very much worth it. And there's another issue that many of us have been feeling that our work is being used to showcase interesting cases connected to community while pushing different agendas. This worries us pretty much, and that's why we would very much like to be directly represented next time. Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Michael Uguia. I'm an ISOC ambassador. I work with many of you, and this is an initiative that I've been very excited about ever since I heard about it last year. What I would like to ask, and running the risk of sounding like a broken record, is how we can incorporate energy needs more into this initiative. That is, how can we contribute to more sustainable energy practices when we are thinking about bringing the next group of the next billion people online, as that will be taxing on our already taxed energy resources, and it is something that we need to consider, considering the global footprint, the global carbon footprint of the internet.
We have a question from over here and remote participation, and then we'll get responses.
Jesus Lau from Mexico, Universidad Veracruzana, and I represent here the International Federation of Library Associations. I'm really pleased to hear that you mentioned libraries, as a focal point for connectivity. Libraries are important for content and access to information. And I would like to hear some, to ask you to emphasize also the development of media and information skills. They are really important. Access is not enough if skills are lacking in our population. Thank you. Good job for.
And one remote participation question, please.
Yes, from Deidre Williams, Civil Society, San Lucia, West Indies, said, I wonder why diesel rather than a solar generator. I wonder why diesel rather than solar generators.
Great. So that was a great set of questions. I think we could sort of think about it in two categories. There's a question about process transparency and funding. Who is at the table? Who funds you? Community networks, private sector involvement, and so on. And there are substantive issues of best practices about energy, content, media, and so on. So since the first question was actually addressed to Christopher, we will start with Christopher, and the other panelists, please respond. Just indicate if you do want to have a response. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you, Helani. I think transparency is critical. We actually disclose every supporter of the project on our website, and I would say that the way we're supported is a reflection and almost a mirror of the way the IGF itself is funded. We're actually supported by a multi-stakeholder group of organizations. The technical community is providing support, governments are providing support, and in fact, businesses are providing support. And we are open to anyone who's willing to, and in fact, we are now getting personal individual donations as a result of the work we're doing at the IGF, and we're being approached by people in that manner. And so we're committed to really being open in that way and transparent. I will say that civil society itself is not actually contributing because they're usually not in a position to do that, but they're contributing in a bunch of other ways, many other ways, mostly by supporting the actual work, which is what we are doing. I would say that because it's based in university, we insist on academic independence. We're committed to studying every example that we can identify, and if people do not want to be included, we of course will respect that. And there are some places for privacy reasons the refugee communities are reluctant to do that. That's completely understandable. But there will be no bias in what we collect. We will collect every study. It'll all be publicly available, publicly disseminated, and that in fact our commitment is to let the data do the talking, and that we can actually find out what's really going on without any bias. And that is the benefit of holding it to academic standards. The last question, if I may, Helani, on the remote question, why diesel, not solar? Everyone would prefer solar. We're looking at case studies now where people are attempting to deploy it. The technology isn't quite there yet. There is at least one or two promising examples, but that's where the kind of cross-cutting data collection can be helpful, because when someone solves that problem, we can then use that, disseminate that information to the rest of the community, because there are many people working on it at the same time, and there's a duplication of effort. When we solve that, we need to share that as quickly as possible with everyone.
Thank you, Alex. Constance, and then, thank you, Chris. Constance, Alex, and then Frank. Okay, and Jane.
Thank you very much. So there was a question about statistics and basically the figures that governments put forward in terms of internet access. The IGF, I don't think, is equipped to do that work, but certainly you've put the finger on something that's very important, being able to compare figures and understanding exactly what is behind those figures. To my knowledge, there are a number of intergovernment organizations who do that work, including the ITU, the OECD, the European Commission, and from what I know, the purpose is exactly to do what you had described, understanding what is behind the figures and making sure there's a clear and transparent methodology. There was another question about participation and ensuring that the work of the IGF is fully inclusive. The methodology of these best practices and policy options really what makes this exercise unique and a little bit complicated if you compare this exercise to what's been produced at the OECD or other intergovernmental organizations, is that we work on the basis of a bottom-up process. So the findings, the correlations, everything is established on the basis of some research, but essentially on what stakeholders spontaneously feed the process, what they contribute to the process. We've reached out through the national, regional IGFs and tried to reach as many stakeholders possible. You talked about making sure that the panel is inclusive. I think it's just a matter of filling the communication gap. The IGF is still a young organization with limited resources, and if we're able to reach you or additional stakeholders next year, that will be a win. In any case, the process is completely open, so I really wanted to emphasize that. Thank you. Back to you, Chair. Moderator.
Thank you. A couple thoughts back on the question on energy companies or energy discussions. And I would add to that health discussions, financial inclusion discussions, all the outcomes that internet or connecting the next billion are going to imply. We have to get those companies in the room or those organizations that work on those issues in the room at IGF. I think the way to do that, or one idea, is for the UN to leverage its legitimacy to approach other UN organizations that deal with healthcare issues or energy issues and get them to either chair working groups or chair white papers, and then they will pull in the companies and the civil society organizations that represent those issues, and they'll come because they'll want to be represented. So I think there's an opportunity to match the bottom-up approach, which is beautiful about IGF, with some top-down assertiveness, and maybe that's something that we can, as a group, can think about on how we engage other sectors into the discussions, because I think that's where we're going. We have to have those other people in the room to talk about diesel versus solar or privacy issues in healthcare that are inevitably going to rise, etc. The second comment is actually on the libraries. I didn't want to, I sort of feel we're going back to a model that was proposed 10, 15 years ago, but I just wanted to give the context. It actually fits to the phase 1 paper, which says that access or the connecting the next billion will only happen if you also address other areas such as skills, awareness, affordability, local content. And then for me, libraries is a great solution that's now come back as a force, so is schools, because it's a place where access can be done affordably. It's a place where people can gather to talk about skills and training and be reinforced as a community. So I didn't mean to be naive to say that. That's what I meant to add. So the work that the coalition has done on that is great. Thank you.
Frank.
On that note, two comments. I wanted to follow up on the libraries. I think it's very important what was said, beyond the fact that libraries can give services, can give training, can be places of meeting and communication. Also, libraries are, in essence, a place for documentary preservation and knowledge preservation, for sharing. And I think this is crucial. In this transition to digital forms, libraries will continue playing a role. And this is essential because this documentary heritage and maintaining it, preserving it, also adds to the future knowledge of next generations of our past, but also to the question of identity, which is, again, essential for cybersecurity and for the security of the world of today in terms of strong identity as a form of preventing extremism and incitement to violence. And this brings me to a topic that is linked to the libraries, which has been mentioned here, which is very essential for us, the question of building the local networks. Using the local content, and we have all said that there is local knowledge, it has to be systematized and shared, and this is important, and there has to be the local networks and the local ISPs is very relevant, but this idea of local knowledge has to be used in a cultural relevant way within respect to cultural diversity and linguistic diversity, which is another priority which internet should have. If we want to make development possible, development is only possible when local communities assume the development agenda. And for that, the content has to be understandable, has to be relevant, has to be usable. And this means to relate to their culture, to their language, and to their reality.
Very briefly on the energy issue, the library issue, and connecting community networks. And this ties in with government transparency. Community networks need spectrum in order to operate. So I would put forward a modest proposal. Why not have a panel next year on how spectrum can be used, shared, dynamic use, and where is it? Where is it enabled in the government resources banks? You know, many countries have a spectrum table which shows you the allocations, the assignments. Why not have community networking spectrum set aside? Second thing with the library issue, and thank you to our colleague from Mexico, we spoke with you the other day. There are libraries in a box, Wi-Fi enabled, from what I understand, a great partner for community networks. This is a great, sort of an exciting topic to think about moving forward. And on electricity, I know some community networks, I'm not speaking for them, I would never do that, use solar power and other interesting alternatives. I would say that if you're going to have a UN representative body bring this issue forward, that you'd also partner up with someone like Usha Edie, who has the BRIC, the BRCK, which is a local power source that's solar enabled. It is not something that would enable a community network fully. It might help charge phones and other devices, but let's think about partnering up with civil society if you do have a UN lead on the electricity issues. Thank you.
And Juan Carlos.
Muchas gracias. Solamente para comentar respecto a la pregunta de qué están haciendo las instituciones públicas en términos de la información estadística tan importante para un regulador del sector para cumplir con la meta de garantizar el acceso a Internet. En el Instituto Federal de Telecomunicaciones se ha hecho un trabajo importante a este respecto. Se tiene ya los 3 años de existencia del instituto con publicaciones trimestrales de información estadística que incluye información relativa al acceso a Internet y a la penetración de la banda ancha fija y móvil. Y también estamos trabajando a nivel regional en Centroamérica y con nuestras contrapartes de América Latina para impulsar justamente este tema de manera que las metodologías sean compartidas y la información sea común, tan importante para tomar decisiones en cuanto a inversiones, en cuanto a promoción del mercado, competencia y todo en favor de los usuarios.
Thank you. Izumi?
I also want to touch on the comment about measurement, and I think it's really important that we have factual and accurate measurement to understand the current state, so that we can try to think of what are the things that we need to address in addition. And I think a couple of our speakers have shared what are the governments or intergovernmental organizations have done to share the statistics. There are also statistics available based on the community initiatives. So, for example, in terms of IPv6, there are engineers, scientists who are providing information on which country is, having a particular rate of IPv6 deployment, and you can also even dig in deeper into which operator within a particular country is having a particular deployment rate. And these are very factual. So it's not just the government that provides the, reliable data, but you can Google in terms of IPv6. I'm sure there are other resources available in other areas as well. I also want to touch quickly on the comment made on how to actually maintain energy and contribution in these kind of initiatives, best practices and other intersessional work. And I think one of it may be more outreach. So I found it interesting how the best practices on gender and access have reached out to each of the national and regional IGFs, not just on the mailing list, but then went to the face-to-face meeting to discuss it. We tried to do that for some of it within our BPF as well, but we weren't able to cover all the regions. And I think there's room for improvement in that area, not just the online interaction, but then when there are opportunities, face-to-face interaction and collect more volunteers and feedback.
Thank you very much for that. I just wanted to briefly comment on Jane's point about the use of spectrum, and obviously this is a critical area. Most of the people who need to be connected are in prepaid mobile environments, and these are still following very old traditional sort of telecom allocation licensing patterns. I just wanted to also point out that there have been a series of spectrum workshops, in fact this round, and they've sort of been on the edges in the smaller workshops, and there's in fact one right after this. I think that's going to be an important thing in future, absolutely, yeah. I think we can take another round of questions. I think we're going to start with our remote participants. Do we have any remote questions? None at the moment? Okay, we'll start on this side this time. Here, and then here.
¿Qué tal? Buenos días. Sí, ¿qué tal? Buenos días. Mi nombre es Efraín Aguilar. Vengo de Infotec y mi tema, o lo que estoy tratando de investigar un poquito más, es sobre las problemáticas del uso del IPv6 y realmente cuáles son los hallazgos que se han encontrado en países desarrollados, en vías de desarrollo, y los que tienen índice 0 no están siendo utilizados, ya que, como comentábamos desde el inicio de la reunión, es una limitante para poder llegar a los 1.000 millones que hacen falta si no se accede al IPv6. Entonces, creo que es algo fundamental donde se pudiera abordar un poquito más, solucionar esta problemática y con esto llegar al compromiso que se tiene de llegar a 1.000 millones más, ¿no? Entonces, quisiera saber si tienen algo más de información en cuestión de esto.
The hands in front here, are your hands down now? Okay, then we'll go on. Here, thank you.
Nalaka Gunawardana from Sri Lanka. It's a question about connecting the next billion, which I think we all agree as an objective. But when we look at many of the initiatives that have been trying to do that over the past 10, 15 years in the developing regions, we find that a lot of them have not really been able to scale up. So there is this question is particularly for One World Connect. When you look at and document projects and initiatives, how do you look at their ability to be sustainable, to be able to scale up? And also, do you differentiate between what I call forever pilots, those who forever remain as pilots, and we've had a lot of this in the past many years, and the quality beyond simple connectivity? Because even for the billion or two who are connected, relevant content and quality of access remains big challenges. So these are questions that I'd like to flag particularly for you.
Hi, my name is Luiz Mahiurel, and I'm a researcher at the Center for Technology and Society in Brazil. But I'm also part of the Youth Observatory and the Youth at IGF program. I just wanted to congratulate the work of the BPF Gender and Access this year, and to understand the role of gender means to assess its intersection actually with economic and social, cultural, and many other aspects, but most importantly with youth. So this year I just wanted to like to highlight the work of some women from the Youth Observatory that we inputted into the BPF Gender with our Young Latin American Declaration, Young Women Latin American Declaration, and just highlight this work and to actually bring up the question of the role of the youth and the many youths in the future of the BPF, and also to ask to Renata and how does she see the role of the BPF Gender in the next year? And most importantly, how to assess more specifically the national and the regional and mostly the local within this complex perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you for that focus on some of the future things we should be looking at. We can go straight on, please. If other people would also focus on that in the last few questions we have, that would be great.
Good morning, Carlos Rey Moreno from the University of the Western Cape in South Africa. I would like to ask all of you documenting best practices on connecting the unconnected to go beyond access, that when we collect the impact of those different initiatives, we don't only talk about numbers on people connected, on uplink, bandwidth, investment, etc., but we also look at what type of society these type of initiatives are trying to create, the transformative effect of the internet and the impact that it may have on changing the world we are living in beyond just providing access to people. Thank you very much.
My name is Azman Shrestha. I'm from Freedom Forum of Nepal. So I'm wondering that the internet governance is very new in my country. So this is my first time to attend IGF. We are thinking of giving a right to information for the people, and we do a proactiveness in that issues, my institution, NGO. But you know, when you talk about the internet connectivity, so there are some kind of nexus that they only do a kind of business rather than giving a service. There are a few experimental process in Nepal that one social activist, he tried to do a kind of a free internet access in the remote villages, even a free Wi-Fi process. But there are lots of obstacles the social activists are facing. So I'm wondering that is there any idea to make a connection with all opportunities, what really the deprived community will need and need to be helped for them? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Right here in the front.
Thank you very much. My name is Helen Ladrón de Guevara. I'm a member of IFLA and also of the Mexican Librarians Association. And I want to thank all of the people that talk on behalf and recognize the work in libraries. But I want to remind that IFLA has this program, Building Stronger Library Associations. And I think that the library associations in different countries can contribute for all of this work to reaching out to 1 billion people. I would like to remind that the Mexican Librarian Association has some partnership or conversations with the Institute of Communication. And I think that's a place where we can work together on metrics. We can have more accurate measurements on what's the outcome and work reaching to people. Mexico has a network of over 7,000 public libraries, and I think that's a golden opportunity to work with the community at the first level, as it has been mentioned, from down to up. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that input. And just to acknowledge that there actually is extraordinary indicator and measurement work going on in the region. And in Brazil, we have a center of excellence in this area. So we should really be drawing on the regional data and capacity and expertise that is there, not only at the multilateral level. If we can go to our remote question now. I'm afraid this is going to have to be our last question.
Okay, thank you. This is from Bruna Santos, from the Brazilian Youth Observatory. She says, regarding regional youth participation, we have made a contribution to the BPF gender, which was very nicely incorporated at the BPF's work. Therefore, my question is, what are the next steps regarding participation? What can we do next?
Thank you very much. We've got very little time left, so I'm going to ask the panelists who questions were posed to. Renata, there was one specifically on gender, if you would take that. Perhaps the one on youth, if you could address that when you're addressing any other questions, because I'm not sure where else we would put that. And then, Christopher, you've got some specific questions, and then you'll go at the end. All right, yes.
Folks, what energy.
We are on the last day of the BPF and we already have questions about our next year's work. Wow. So it's amazing to get these questions. And yes, there is more. There's so much more to do. It is great that you're already thinking of it. And as a multi-stakeholder community, the IGF will continue to invest in its intersessional work, and the BPF, which has continued to exist with linkages to current, to previous work, will also try and keep this linkage going. And it is amazing to have such a varied group of youth participants and such an energy to contribute to this work. It is incredibly important. And creating regional and national links also goes through considering regions and groups. So we have the youth from Brazil, we have the youth from Asia also involved, and we hope to have even more. So it was great that you could send in contributions to be incorporated, and this is what the intersessional work is about. We have to build bridges to get to this IGF with our records, with our policy recommendations, from a discussion of a multi-stakeholder community, ever more vibrant and ever more rich. You all can have your voice. You all can have your say. We need you to prepare for next year. We need you to shape the next IGF, the next intersessional work. So thank you for these contributions.
Thank you very much for that. And if panelists, you don't have to use this minute, if you can cut it short, please do. Constance, please.
Thank you very much. I'll try to address very quickly two questions, the one about youth and the one about next steps. As Renata mentioned, the engagement with the community does not end with this IGF. We are already calling for themes, ideas for next year's IGF, best practices and policy options. If there's appetite to develop a best practice forum around the theme of youth, I think that should really be put forward. And personally, I think it's an excellent idea. More generally, in terms of next steps, immediately after the IGF ends, we will be engaging with the community to identify next year's themes for best practices, and also thinking about how to take the Connecting the Next Billion to phase 3. And I think Alex and Christopher mentioned the direction that could be possible, which is really to go from the level of theoretical policy options and supplementing them, supporting them with case studies, information that comes from the field. And in any case, this proposal and other proposals will be put forward to the next MAG meeting. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Christopher?
So to pick up on a theme that both Alison and Alex mentioned, information sharing is critical, is what we're committed to. We're building, as we said initially, on the excellent work that Constance and this group has done. And we've actually leveraged with the gender BPF and helped develop their case studies, and actually their case studies are now our case studies. It's a good example of how we can make this work. We collaborate with the BPFs on the IXPs, so it's really an example of how we can build all of this. The question about making sure it doesn't scale, yes, there are permanent pilots. That's why we're doing the data. I mean, and we are, a major focus of what we're looking for is sustainable, scalable business models for connectivity. And I've been cautioned, maybe models is too strong, approaches, scenarios, but the exercise has been one of complication, not simplification and reduction, and that we are learning that there are different factors we need to take into account that are making the problem richer and more complicated, but ultimately is what's necessary to make it useful. And so part of the metrics question is an attempt to try to figure that out, the quality of access, to try to assess what the upward path is going to be, and to try to make all that. And we're actually getting instruments now and combining with other sources of data to find ways to do that in a cost-effective way. But I agree with you 100%. I will confess, we're at the beginning of that process of developing those strategies. And if that's something we'll welcome your participation on. Lastly, the thing I've heard constantly is the need for real data. And that's what our project is all about, and the leverage from sharing it. We've talked about solar and spectrum. We already have identified examples where people have done innovative things in using success to affect policy change. In Vanuatu, they opened up the 900 megahertz band to support community networking. And if that's an example that we can share with others, Rhizomatic has convinced the regulator to overlay additional licenses. The hard part is measuring impact beyond these sorts of things. The SDGs have tremendous momentum. We're starting to develop data. It's less systematic. It's harder. And in terms of the type of society that, Carlos, we've had a conversation about this, that's the hardest of all. We probably get some qualitative assessment about this, but in the end, this is the time for us to try to build those solutions.
Thanks very much, Christopher. Izumi?
Thank you for the question about IPv6. I was wondering our topic might be too technical, and so happy to have someone who's aware of the issue and see the relevance and importance, so thank you so much. And then the interesting thing about IPv6 is that there's no correlation between high rate of V6 deployment and the GDPs. So it's not just the developed countries that will do well in IPv6, but there are countries such as Peru, Ecuador, Greece, Trinidad, Tobago. These are the countries that is within top 20 of V6 deployment rate. And we're actually sharing case studies in different parts of the region across not just the developed countries. So it's in our best practices document. It's also like measures being shared in last year's document and what governments can do, what the community can do. We've also identified the challenges that we're facing, and the three points that I shared at the beginning on what each player can do are the things that we can do to address how to overcome these challenges. And there are actually like a couple of other resources available. I'm happy to share with you individually after this. And lastly, I do recognize that there's still like a need for more deep study into why a particular country is doing well in IPv6, where the economic or social environment is similar, and then the other countries, with very similar environment is doing very low. And I think there's limitation in doing this just on volunteer basis. So I believe that we need some dedicated, paid, professional researcher to take over this work on further analysis. But we already have a couple of available researchers, and happy to share with you and take a look at our best practices document.
Thank you very much, Izumi. One last word from Frank.
Very last word, 2 words. No, one is on the libraries again. It is true, and I was very pleased to hear our friends from Mexico and the public libraries of Mexico that libraries are everything we said about centers of communication, research, and documentary heritage, but also they are great centers for gathering data and information. And this is part of the focus we're having in the work we're doing around the world is documentary heritage, yes, but data recollection and processing in libraries, which is fundamental. And the final word is very important, was mentioned here, is this is the international IGF of a multi-national level. It is very relevant to have now regional and country-specific IGFs so the policy making and the policy makers can receive input for their policies and for the future of Internet in their own countries and in their own regions. Muchas gracias y hasta el año entrante.
Thank you very much for that, Frank.
Thank you. So let's close it up by Constance, our chair, and the host country chair, Juan Carlos, with having 1-minute interventions.
Thank you very much. I would simply like to thank the different leaders, experts, people from the Secretariat who have been carrying the work around intersessional activities, whether best practices or the policy options. As I've said, this has really been a multi-stakeholder bottom-up exercise, which makes it unique, but also a little bit more challenging than what usually takes place in other fora. And also allow me to conclude by saying that the engagement with the community does not stop with this IGF. The draft outputs are still up on the IGF website, open for comments. They will be finalized shortly after. And as I've said, we are already welcoming some ideas, thoughts on how to take the best practices and also the policy options to the next stage for 2017. Thank you very much.
Ok. Bueno, muchas gracias. La segunda fase del programa Policy Options for Connecting and Enabling the Next Billion, que nos convoca hoy, ha sido sin duda un gran esfuerzo de la comunidad del IGF. Esfuerzo concentrado a incidir a través de mejoras en la gobernanza y política global de Internet, en el logro de resultados tangibles que permitan alcanzar los objetivos de desarrollo sustentable. Concluyo esta intervención llamando la atención sobre la necesidad de discutir los desafíos que debemos enfrentar con relación a la adopción y el uso de las tecnologías de manera que maximicen su impacto social, económico y político. Esto me parece representa una oportunidad para demostrar el valor del modelo multi-stakeholder. En nombre de México, del Instituto Federal de Telecomunicaciones, agradecer a todos su participación. Muchas felicidades.
Yeah. Thank you. We survived.